Most men speak to be heard. Few are remembered. In a world drowning in noise, real power belongs to the one who speaks less but means more. Not because he's afraid, but because he's mastered silence, restraint, and presence. Every careless word drains you, costs you trust, respect, and bridges you can't rebuild. And if you don't control what you say, your words will end up controlling your life. Stoic philosophy cuts deep. The tongue is strongest when held back. This isn't about staying quiet forever. It's about mental discipline, emotional control, and speaking only when it lands like a stone. The man who listens before he speaks, who stays calm under fire, earns quiet respect, not empty noise. That's dominance. That's strength. This video isn't theory, it's a tool. Through lessons sharpened by Stoic wisdom and lived experience, you'll learn how to guard your words, control your reactions, and lead without shouting. Not someday, now. You'll walk away with practical Stoic habits you can apply today. To protect your peace, command attention, and speak with intention. If you're tired of regrets, tired of being misunderstood, this is your moment. Because the more you master your words, the more you master yourself. Your silence builds your world. Your control shapes it. Let's begin. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell. Because from this moment on, every word counts. 1. Listen like a warrior. A man who speaks rarely but listens deeply carries a weight that few can match. He walks into a room and doesn't rush to speak. He doesn't interrupt. He doesn't fight to be the center of attention. Yet, when the conversation ends, everyone remembers what he said. Not because he said much, but because he said what mattered. His silence doesn't signal insecurity, it signals control. While others talk to prove their point, he listens to understand the room. That's why he commands respect without demanding it. He doesn't dominate conversations, he steers them quietly. And that's the kind of presence that lingers long after the noise fades. People mistake volume for strength. But in truth, noise often comes from insecurity. The man who speaks less is not less intelligent. He's calculating. He's present. He listens, not to wait for his turn to talk, but to hear what's not being said. And that makes him dangerous, in the best way. Because when he speaks, it's with precision, with weight, with timing that strikes deeper than any outburst ever could. Fred Rogers, the quiet, cardigan-wearing host of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, was once asked to interview a young boy who had become paralyzed. He didn't prepare a motivational speech. He didn't come with words of wisdom. He simply sat with the boy, listened to his stories, and nodded gently, with genuine attention. The boy smiled, not because he was inspired, but because, for the first time in weeks, someone made him feel human again. No fix, no advice, just presence. Just silence filled with warmth. That moment became one of the most replayed, respected interviews in American television. Not for what was said, but for what wasn't. And in that stillness, a real connection was made. In a world obsessed with fast replies and hot takes, that kind of listening feels almost alien. But it's exactly what Stoicism trains you for. Not the art of debate, but the art of discernment. Epictetus reminded us, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. It's not just a quote to admire, it's a ratio to live by, especially when emotions run high, when pride wants to jump in, when ego demands to be heard. That's when silence is no longer weakness, it's a weapon. True Stoic communication begins with presence. You can't speak wisely if you're not even present enough to hear fully. Presence means shutting off the mental script that's always preparing a reply. It means not rushing to relate everything back to your own story. It means letting someone else speak and not needing to one-up or redirect. And when you start practicing this form of still attention, something unexpected happens. You begin to understand yourself more. You begin to notice your own impatience. Your inner voice that says, "Let me talk," starts to feel like noise. And over time, you learn to mute that voice until the moment is truly right. This isn't about staying silent to seem mysterious or stoic for the sake of image. It's about developing self-control so sharp that your silence becomes strategic. When you listen like a warrior, you don't speak until you've observed the battlefield. Tone, tension, motive. You don't swing unless the moment demands it. Just like a swordsman who doesn't flail, but waits, measures, and strikes once with impact. Daily life gives you endless chances to train this. You don't need a dramatic setting. Start small. In your next conversation, resist the urge to interject. Let pauses hang. Let the other person fill the silence. And when you do speak, make it count. Ask a real question, not one to keep the conversation going, but one that makes them stop and think. It's not about being clever, it's about being intentional. The 70-30 rule isn't arbitrary, it's practical. Listening 70% of the time gives you room to think, room to adjust, and most importantly, room to understand. When you give someone that space, they open up in ways they wouldn't have if you'd filled every gap. And that's when you start seeing beneath the surface. You read what they didn't say, you catch what others miss. That's power. And as you become better at listening, something else happens. You start needing to speak less, because now you're not guessing, you're not reacting, you're seeing the bigger picture. You're operating with clarity. And clarity doesn't need volume, it needs stillness. In meetings, the man who listens most and speaks least often leaves the strongest impression. In relationships, the one who doesn't rush to fix, but simply hears, becomes the most trusted. In conflict, the one who pauses before replying holds the highest ground. Because listening isn't passive, it's presence, it's control, it's wisdom in motion. You don't need to fill every silence, you don't need to prove you're paying attention, you just need to be present. And when the time comes to speak less, mean more. Silence, when grounded in awareness, becomes power. Listening, when fueled by discipline, becomes influence. You won't need to dominate the room, because the room will lean in when you finally speak. And that is how a warrior listens. 2. Rule your emotions, rule your words. Let's begin with a story. A single father working the closing shift at Home Depot. Tired, burned out, but still holding it together. Long hours, short sleep, bills piling up, but he shows up, because that's what men do. Around 8:30 p.m., a customer storms in, furious about a delayed order. It wasn't his fault, the system had glitched. But the man didn't want a solution. He wanted someone to blame. So he shouted, loud, mocking, in front of everyone. He pushed, he humiliated. The father clenched his jaw, curled his fists. He had stayed calm 100 times before, but that night, he cracked. One sharp reply, one insult. The customer filed a complaint. 2 days later, the job was gone. He didn't lose because he was wrong. He lost because he reacted wrong. That's the kind of loss that stays with you. When emotions speak before we do, what's broken can't always be repaired. You've been there. That moment when anger rises faster than reason. You say something, maybe even something true, but it cuts like a blade. And suddenly you've damaged something it took years to build. In Stoic philosophy, this is where the real battle happens. Not in the chaos outside, but in the chaos within. Marcus Aurelius lived through betrayal, war, and plague, but what filled his journals was not the outside world, it was the storm inside. Because the enemy is never just the situation, it's how we choose to respond to it. Modern neuroscience agrees. When emotion spikes, your amygdala hijacks your brain. The thinking part, your prefrontal cortex, goes offline. Which means in that moment, you are not the best version of yourself. You are adrenaline with a mouth. And that version of you doesn't speak from strength, it speaks from survival. So what do you do when the storm hits? You pause, you breathe. You create space between the feeling and the action. That space is where your strength lives. That pause isn't weakness, it's mastery. You don't need to win the moment, you don't need to clap back. Most of the time, you don't even need to speak. The strongest move is to stay in control. That's why the Stoics practiced what we now call emotional delay, a pause between stimulus and response. Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." That's not a quote for your wall. That's a challenge for your life. Emotional control isn't about pretending. It's not suppression, it's transformation. You don't bury the anger, you name it. I feel disrespected. I feel unseen. Naming the emotion shifts your brain from reaction to reflection. And now, you're back in control. Need a practical way to do it? Grab a pen. Write down what you want to say. Every insult, every comeback. But don't post it. Don't send it. Just write. Abraham Lincoln used to do this. He called them hot letters. He'd write them, then lock them in a drawer. That act alone was enough. The writing calmed the storm. The silence preserved his power. And if that feels too distant, here's one more thing. Choose a physical anchor. When the urge hits, touch your wrist. Breathe in, breathe out. That microsecond of intention can prevent a landslide of damage. 3 seconds of silence can save 3 years of rebuilding. So let's go back to that father. What if he had paused? What if, instead of snapping, he had stood still, listened, and said, "I'll do what I can to help"? Same truth, same man, different outcome. The job stays, the respect stays. The pride doesn't feed your children, but control does. Have you ever been in a situation like the father above? You knew you were being mistreated, pushed too far, but instead of holding ground with calm, you reacted. And just like that, they won. Not because they were right, but because you lost control. The words slipped out, the look, the tone. And even if your point was valid, your reaction became the problem. Drop a comment. Tell me how you handled it. Would you have reacted the same way he did? Or did you find a different path? Because if you master your emotions, you master your voice. And when you master your voice, you shape what people remember about you. Stoicism doesn't ask you to feel less. It teaches you to feel deeply, but respond wisely. It's not about silence, it's about timing. It's not about weakness, it's about power held in reserve. And in today's world where everyone's screaming to be heard, your calm becomes your rebellion. So don't hand your power over to the moment. Reclaim it. Use it with discipline. Speak only when your voice brings clarity, not chaos. Every word you hold back in anger is a brick saved in the foundation of your character. Every insult you swallow is a moment you stay in command. Every deep breath is a silent declaration. I don't serve my emotions, I lead them. And that is the quiet difference between men who lead and men who lose. 3. Think twice, speak once. Why do we feel the need to speak just to prove we're thinking? Why do we rush to respond, to interrupt, to correct, as if silence means we're invisible? But the truth is, the most respected person in the room isn't the loudest. It's the one who holds his thoughts like sharpened tools and only draws them when the moment is right. In a world addicted to instant opinions, holding back has become a rare strength. Speaking your mind is easy. Holding your tongue takes power. Most people speak to release pressure, to feel significant, to sound smart. But the man who disciplines his voice doesn't need to sound smart. He waits for clarity. He waits for invitation. And when he speaks, people listen, not because he demands it, but because his silence already earned it. Self-control in speech isn't passive. It's strategic. It's not about staying quiet to please people. It's about knowing that not every thought deserves to become a sound. Not every truth needs to be spoken now. Stoic philosophy isn't about repression, it's about restraint with purpose. Epictetus said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." And that's what most can't handle. The feeling of being overlooked, misunderstood, or underestimated. But the Stoic doesn't need to defend his intelligence. He lets his actions do that for him. There's a kind of strength in a man who can sit in a meeting, hear something flawed, and not jump in just to be right. He watches the timing, he watches the room, and when the room is ready, not defensive, not tense, he adds value instead of noise. His words aren't corrections, they're contributions, not delivered with ego, but with clarity. And that's the kind of communication that builds influence over time, not friction. Every time you speak, you spend energy. You expose your thoughts to judgment, you commit yourself to a position, and the more often you speak, the more often you have to defend. That's why the man who speaks less has more freedom. He can pivot, he can walk away, because he never overcommitted to a careless opinion. That kind of verbal discipline is rare and unforgettable. Now let's bring this down to real life. There's a software engineer at a startup in Austin. In a Monday morning brainstorm, the CEO tossed out an idea, one that didn't quite make sense. Several in the room shifted uncomfortably. One developer was about to speak up, but another didn't. He just made a note. 15 minutes passed. Then quietly, when the tension had eased, he said, "I think there might be a way to cut 40% of the work time. I could be wrong, but if you're open to it, I'd be happy to walk you through it later today." Calm. No ego. No spotlight stealing. By the next day, that engineer's solution was being implemented. He didn't win because he was louder. He won because he was precise. He chose clarity over reaction. That's what real professionals notice. Not bravado, not volume, but timing, tone, and value. He didn't need to prove he was smart. His restraint said more than his words ever could. Think about your own life. When was the last time your words backfired? Not because you were wrong, but because you said the right thing at the wrong time? Or to the wrong person? Or in the wrong way? Have you ever made a brilliant point that no one heard, simply because your timing made them defensive? That's what Stoicism helps you change. It trains you to read the moment, to observe the current, to wait for the right opening. And if it never comes, you stay silent, because you don't speak to be seen. You speak to make a difference. Try this. The next time a thought comes to you, pause, count 3 seconds, then ask, is this necessary? Is this the right time? Will it serve or will it stir? If the answer isn't clear, hold it in. Let your silence stretch. Let the others fill the space. And when you finally speak, say half of what you planned. Because a well-placed sentence lands louder than a 5-minute monologue. This isn't about manipulation. It's about mastery. You're not holding back to trick people. You're holding back to protect your energy, your credibility, and your peace of mind. Because words once spoken can't be pulled back. They ripple, they echo, they build or they break. In meetings, the man who says less but delivers value gets remembered. In relationships, the partner who listens more and speaks with intention earns trust. In conflict, the one who responds with stillness holds the advantage. And in life, the one who disciplines his words never has to apologize for saying too much. So speak like someone who's going to live with the echo. Speak as if the room will remember how you made them feel, not how fast you replied. And above all, speak when your voice carries weight, not just sound. Because you don't need to speak to prove you're sharp. You only need to speak when silence has done enough. You've made it this far, and that says something most won't ever say out loud. You're not here for noise, you're here for depth. Stay with it, because the further we go, the quieter it gets, and the more powerful you become. 4. Build in silence. We talk about goals a lot. The book you'll write, the business you'll start, the shape you'll get in. Everyone has a vision, and most of them gather dust. Because words are cheap. Sharing your plan gives a brief high. It earns you nods, compliments, sometimes even applause. But applause doesn't build. Praise doesn't move the needle. In fact, the more we talk about what we'll do, the less likely we are to do it. Talking tricks the mind. It creates the illusion of progress where there's none. You feel accomplished without taking a single step forward. And that's where momentum dies. Stoicism understood this long before psychology gave it a name. Real strength isn't in announcing what you'll do. It's in quietly doing it. Every day. When no one is watching. That's not weakness. That's power under control. Because when you build in silence, no one can sabotage what they can't see. When you work without performance, you create without pressure. And when your progress is private, your failure is quiet, but your results speak loud. That's why Stoics like Marcus Aurelius didn't talk about living simply. He just lived simply. He didn't post about discipline, he embodied it. His silence didn't make him invisible, it made him unforgettable. There's a man in Ohio, middle-aged, quiet, steady, a carpenter. For years he told his friends he wanted to start his own workshop. He had the skills, the tools, the passion. But every year passed and nothing changed. The dream became a script he repeated at cookouts and bars. Someday I'll have my own space. But someday kept drifting. Until one day he stopped talking. No more plans shared, no more hypotheticals. After work he started saving, fixing up a rundown garage he found on the edge of town, nights, weekends, quietly. 8 months passed. Then one morning he opened his shop. No announcement, no grand opening post, just a new door. A clean bench, and work that spoke louder than anything he'd ever said. Now he has clients, repeat orders, respect. Not because he promised, because he delivered. And that's what separates dreamers from doers. When you talk about your vision too early, you invite judgment, you invite distraction. Worst of all, you get addicted to the recognition instead of the result. Your brain collects the dopamine, and suddenly the pressure to actually perform vanishes. What's left is a string of public intentions with no private foundation. And slowly, you stop trusting yourself. Because every time you say you'll do something and don't, your confidence erodes. But when you stay quiet, when you grind without needing to be seen, you train something deeper. Discipline, direction, integrity. This isn't about hiding, it's about protecting what matters. Stoicism teaches you to guard your inner world, to avoid scattering your energy with noise. Epictetus wrote, If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. The man who doesn't talk much about what he's building often gets underestimated. That's fine, because when he's ready, no one will question where it came from. Ask yourself, how many of your goals have you spoken out loud, only to abandon halfway? How often have you gotten applause for a plan you never started? What if you had said nothing and just done the work? Try this. For the next 30 days, say nothing about your goals. Not online, not even to friends. Instead, write them down. Break them into actions. Then check off the actions, not the promises. Watch how much more you get done when no one's watching. That's how you build real momentum. Not through noise, through movement. You don't owe anyone a roadmap. You don't need to convince people you're serious. Be serious in silence. Let your life prove it. Because when the results come, they won't need your explanation. They'll see it, they'll feel it, and they'll remember it, because it came without the usual performance. The Stoics weren't performers, they were practitioners. They didn't post, they didn't promise. They prepared, in silence, in discipline, in private. And centuries later, we still quote them, not because of what they said about themselves, but because of how they lived. So don't talk to impress. Don't share to gain validation. Talk when it's done. Share when it's solid. Let your path stay yours until it's paved. Because every step you take in silence builds strength. And every quiet victory creates a kind of confidence no one can shake. That's the type of confidence that doesn't need to speak, because the work already did. 5. Protect your inner circle. Let's be honest, most of us have at some point been betrayed by our own words. Not someone else's, ours. We said too much, shared too soon, trusted the wrong person. And what we thought was honesty turned out to be ammunition, used not to protect us, but to expose us. Because here's the truth no one wants to admit. Sometimes your words can help you grow. But sometimes they come with side effects. The desire to open up, to be seen, to be understood. It's real. But not everyone who listens is listening to help. Some are waiting, taking notes, smiling as they store your vulnerability like currency they'll use when the moment benefits them most. And that's why Stoicism doesn't just teach emotional control, it teaches selective truth. Knowing what to say is one thing. Knowing who deserves to hear it is another. We live in a culture obsessed with oversharing. Post every thought, speak every truth. Say how you really feel. But truth without discretion is a kind of self-destruction. Because not everyone you speak to has earned the right to hold your inner world. And not every moment is a safe one to open that door. There's a reason Stoics prized silence as much as speech. Because silence isn't just power, it's protection. Epictetus once said, "Keep silence for the most part and speak only when necessary." Not because your truth isn't important, but because it's valuable. And anything valuable should be guarded with care. Let's break this down. Every time you share something personal, you give someone a key that opens access to your emotions, your past, your fears, your plans. And some people use that key with care. Others don't. Not because they're evil, but because they're impulsive, insecure, or simply not ready to carry what you handed them. Imagine your mind as a vault, not a cage, but a space for only the essentials. The more you leave that vault open, the more you dilute what matters. The more you give people access to your unfinished work, the more chances they have to misunderstand it, or worse, to weaponize it. Mike Tyson knows this firsthand. In several interviews, he's admitted to a harsh truth. I trusted the wrong people. At the peak of his fame, he shared his plans, his fears, his struggles with friends, advisors, hangers-on. He believed loyalty came with proximity. But as he later learned, proximity doesn't equal protection. Never share what you're not ready to lose, he said. And that's the line that stuck. Because once it's out there, it's not yours anymore. It belongs to interpretation, to gossip, to spin. And even if your heart was clean, the impact can be anything but. So how do you live this out? You don't go silent forever. You filter. You test people in 3 ways: joy, pain, and silence. Have they been there in your high moments, without envy? Have they sat with you in your low ones, without judgment? Have they respected your silence, not demanding explanations, but offering presence? If they haven't met you in those 3 places, they haven't earned the right to meet your truth. You also train yourself to recognize the difference between connection and confession. You don't owe your story to everyone who's willing to hear it. especially not at work, especially not in new friendships, especially not online, because oversharing isn't vulnerability. It's a lack of boundaries dressed up as authenticity. This doesn't mean closing off. It means channeling wisely, sharing when the space is safe, speaking when the person has earned your trust, not when your emotions need release. And most importantly, knowing that keeping something to yourself doesn't make it less real. It makes it yours. Ask yourself, how many times have you revealed too much only to regret it later? How often have you opened up only to realize the other person wasn't listening, they were storing? And if you feel like you've been burned before, you're not paranoid. You're awake. The Stoic way is this: let people earn your silence before they ever touch your truth. Let time be the test. Let presence be the proof. Because when you give too much, too fast, you lose something even more precious than your privacy. You lose your power. Guard it with intention, with wisdom. Not because you're hiding, but because you're building something worth protecting. Because the more you grow, the less you'll need to explain. The more you see clearly, the less you'll feel the urge to prove. And the more grounded you become, the more you'll realize, not everyone deserves access to your truth. 6. Strike with silence. There are moments when silence is the only thing standing between you and self-destruction. When your pride is burning, your ego is screaming, and every part of you wants to fire back. And yet, you don't. You hold, you breathe, you stay still. That's not weakness. That's strength most people will never know, because most people react. But the man who owns his silence owns the room. We've all felt it, that heat rising under the collar when someone disrespects us. The sarcastic tone, the backhanded comment, the subtle jab in front of others. Everything in you wants to answer, to defend, to correct. But if you've ever held your tongue in that moment and just looked calm, unmoved, in control, you already know. Nothing says dominance like not needing to speak. Stoicism doesn't ask you to become passive. It trains you to become powerful through precision. Because a man who reacts to every insult isn't strong, he's predictable. He's easy to control. But the one who chooses stillness, who holds his ground without raising his voice, becomes unreadable. And in that unreadability lies power. Take Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, a man who faced betrayal from within his own court, lost children to illness, and commanded armies during endless war. And yet, in the chaos, he didn't shout from balconies or crush his enemies with grand declarations. He wrote, alone, quietly, to himself. Meditations wasn't for the world. It was his journal, a private place to stay centered in storms. One of his most powerful lines, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." That wasn't philosophy. That was a code, a challenge to rise above. Because anyone can retaliate. Anyone can mirror disrespect. But to walk through fire and still speak like the flame didn't touch you, that's different. That's discipline. And that's exactly what you need to bring into your own life. The next time someone calls you out in public, mocks your work, disrespects you with a smile, pause. Let them finish. Look them in the eye, say nothing, or say just enough. Because the silence that follows will echo louder than any comeback ever could. People will remember it. Because silence, in that context, doesn't say, "I'm afraid." It says, "I don't answer to you." It says, "You don't control my reactions." This kind of power doesn't show up in arguments. It shows up in outcomes. In the way others shift when you speak less and say more. In the way people check themselves before testing you again. You don't have to shout to be heard. You don't have to fight every battle to be respected. The world watches not how loud you speak, but how little it takes to shake you. Ask yourself, how often have your sharpest words actually changed anything? Did they fix the problem, or did they just fuel it? And more importantly, who did you become in the process of trying to prove your point? Because the more you react, the more they own your energy. And every time you lose control, you let them write your story. But when you choose silence, you choose authorship, you choose restraint. And in that restraint, you send a message. I don't need revenge. I don't need validation. I don't even need to be right in your eyes. I just need to remain myself. That's the win most people never reach. Not to beat others, but to stay undisturbed while they try to pull you out of character. And let's be real. We live in a culture where loudness is confused with confidence, where people think attention equals influence. But real power doesn't chase the spotlight. It moves quietly, builds in silence, and speaks only when necessary. The most respected man in any room is rarely the one who talks the most. It's the one who only speaks when it counts. So here's your move. Start treating your silence like a sword, not a weakness. Use it with intention. Let others reveal themselves while you observe. Speak only when the words sharpen the moment, not when they blur it. And next time someone throws words at you hoping for a reaction, disappoint them with your composure. Not because you're passive, but because you're built different. Because silence is not absence, it's presence. It's the kind of presence that holds its ground without raising its voice. The kind that says, I'm not here to react, I'm here to last. 7. Let achievements speak. You don't need to tell the world what you're building, just stand on it one day. That's enough. That's everything. Because when the foundation is real, it doesn't need marketing. It holds its own weight. Most people announce too early. They chase recognition before there's something to recognize. They share their plans to feel progress, to feel supported, to feel seen. But Stoic wisdom cuts through all that noise. It says, don't announce the seed, nurture the root. Because if you speak too soon, you trade action for applause. And applause is addictive. It feels like movement, but it's just noise. Loud, fast, hollow. That's why results born in silence are stronger. They grow without judgment, without pressure. And when they bloom, they're undeniable. Not because you told everyone, because you didn't need to. Like planting a seed. You don't dig it up every day to see if it's growing. You water it, you protect it, you give it time, and in time it breaks through. Quietly, powerfully, without asking permission. In today's world, people confuse exposure with progress. But there's a difference between being visible and being ready. Just because everyone knows what you're doing doesn't mean you're doing it well. Sometimes it just means you're building in public and under pressure. Stoicism asks something deeper of you. It asks for privacy with purpose, action without validation, movement without commentary. Because the more you speak, the more you stake your identity in words instead of work. But the one who stays silent, who builds in the shadows, emerges with something that can't be ignored: substance. This doesn't mean you never speak. It means you speak when it's done. You let the work do what your words can't. You don't fight for credit. You don't chase applause. You let gravity do its job. Look around. The people you truly respect, are they loud or are they focused? Are they everywhere or are they grounded? The man who speaks the loudest often has the least to show, but the one who shows up quietly every day, he becomes undeniable. Not because he demands attention, but because he becomes impossible to overlook. Ask yourself, how much of your energy is going into updates, announcements, explanations, and how much is going into execution? The Stoic knows the value of restraint. He doesn't post every small win. He doesn't defend every decision. He doesn't market his journey. He walks it, alone if needed, because he knows that when he arrives, the path itself will be proof. You don't have to stay hidden forever, but you do have to stay grounded long enough for the roots to take hold. Otherwise, when the first storm hits, everything you built for show will collapse. But if you built in silence, with discipline, with patience, then the storm becomes your stage. Try this. For the next 90 days, don't announce anything. Just act. Do the thing. Keep track in silence. Resist the urge to explain. Let that energy pour into building instead of broadcasting. Let the outcome speak for you when it's ready. Because the real flex is not needing to flex. Epictetus wrote, first say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. Not say it loud, not broadcast it daily. Just do it. Quietly, consistently. And when the day comes that people ask how you made it look so effortless, you'll smile, because you know it wasn't. But the effort wasn't for show, it was for strength, quietly built, brick by brick, day by day. And in that silence, you didn't disappear. You became undeniable. In a world driven by noise, the ability to control what you say is a rare strength. One that sets you apart, earns quiet respect, and builds an unshakable foundation of trust. Today, we've walked through 7 Stoic principles, not as abstract philosophy, but as tools for real life. Tools to help you listen like a warrior, rule your emotions, choose your words with clarity, build in silence, protect your truth, strike with stillness, and let your achievements speak louder than any announcement. The truth is, Your words shape your world. And when you master your voice, you shape how people remember you. Not as someone who reacts, but someone who leads. Not someone who needs to prove, but someone who stands firm. That's the essence of Stoic self-discipline. That's the power of emotional clarity. That's the mindset of someone who builds without permission and speaks only when it serves purpose. But this isn't about just knowing. It's about practicing. Start with one habit. Pause before you speak. Write instead of react. Listen more than you share. Track when you talk to be understood and when you talk just to be heard. These shifts don't require perfection. They require presence. If this message spoke to something real in you, then let it be the start of your quiet transformation. The world doesn't need more noise. It needs more men who speak with intention and lead with stillness. And if you've had moments where silence served you, or moments when words cost you something, share them in the comments. Your story might be the next reminder someone else needs. Train your voice, guard your words, speak with purpose. Because when you speak less, but mean more, you're already walking the Stoic path.